Hey guys, Nike here. This is the updated Thief build guide for Dungeons and Fractals after the June 23rd specialization patch. Quite a lot has changed for the Thief, and we've received some interesting buffs and nerfs this patch. Overall, we should be getting a pretty nice buff to Thief DPS, as well as a nice buff to Team Utility. Our Thief build is a DPS build focusing on providing maximal personal DPS while also contributing decent amounts of vulnerability stacks and providing blinds and projectile defenses as needed. This is a versatile build that operates well in organized groups and pugs. It's among the highest DPS builds in the game, and the newfound ability to provide group-wide vigor gives Thief even more team utility, which was an unexpected but definitely a welcome change. So let's get into it. Alright guys, let's talk about traits. The traits we're going to take are Deadly Arts, Critical Strikes, and Trickery. In Deadly Arts, we are going to select Mug. Dagger Training no longer has a 5% built-in DPS increase, so Mug is actually going to be better DPS for us overall. We're going to want to then take Revealed Training at the Master level. And at the Grandmaster level, Executioner. These traits are all going to be a good way to increase the Thief's overall DPS. The next line we're going to take is Critical Strikes. And the Critical Strikes, we're going to select Flawless Strike, Sundering Strikes, and No Quarter at the Grandmaster level. These traits will all serve to increase our DPS. Flawless Strike is preferred over Side Strike. It's a slightly better DPS increase, as you can reach a very high critical chance with full Berserker stats and Signet of Agility, along with Keen Observer and Food. At the Grandmaster level, you might want to switch No Quarter for Invigorating Precision for especially challenging content if you're having difficulty surviving or you're new to the Thief class. And at the Master level, you can switch Sundering Strikes for Practice Tolerance in certain situations. If you're doing open world stuff and you're just going around solo and you don't have a team with you, Practice Tolerance is going to be a much bigger DPS increase than Sundering Strikes. However, if you're trioing, or doing a full groups of content, full team content, you're going to want to go with Sundering Strikes. So these two traits are somewhat interchangeable, but Sundering Strikes for group play is slightly preferred, and Practice Tolerance for solo play is preferred there. So moving on to our third trait line, we are going to select Trickery. Trickery, we will take Haste, the Flanking Strikes trait. This does have a very long internal cooldown, but it's a nice DPS burst right at the start of the fight. The next option you could take there is Thrill of the Crime. If you're in a group that has low Fury uptime, you might want to consider Thrill of the Crime to give your team the Fury that it needs. But otherwise, you just generally want to go with Haste, because it's a very powerful way to start each fight. Next, we're going to take Bountiful Theft. Bountiful Theft is a great way to give vigor to your party with pretty nice uptime. Our Steel cooldown is 20 seconds, thereabouts, so you're going to have 50% vigor uptime for your party, which is a really nice team utility boost. We now get access to Lead Attacks, which is anywhere, well, it's a very big DPS increase based on the amount of initiative you have. Obviously, we're going to be spending our initiative as part of our DPS rotation, so it'll never be maxed out, but it's really nice to have that extra boost. And at the Grandmaster level, you can take Sleight of Hand, which reduces the recharge of Steel. Some people have said, well, why not Quick Pockets? Well, reducing the recharge of Steel helps a bit with the Vigor uptime. It helps a bit with Kleptomaniac. Yes, Quick Pockets, swapping weapons in combat will give you a lot of extra initiative. However, generally speaking, our set of weapons that are on our swap are not something that we want to go into in combat very often. If you're on Dagger, you pretty much want to stay on Dagger, and if you're on Sword Pistol, you pretty much want to stay on Sword Pistol. You don't want to kind of go back between the goal, the overall theme of the build that you're running. So, as I said, the goal of this build is to maximize personal DPS by utilizing the proper Cloak and Dagger backstab into Heartseeker rotations, and additionally through the proper swapping around of utility skills, the build provides valuable team utility with Blind, Stealth, Vigor, and Projectile defenses. So we will get into consumables up next. Alright, so now let's discuss consumables. For all the viable builds, the absolute optimal food that you can get is the bowl of seaweed salad. A 10% while moving DPS increase is simply the most powerful food that you can get. However, it does impact your playstyle. You have to be able to constantly keep this going, and it can be annoying and it can be difficult. So I really don't necessarily recommend these a ton, especially to newer players who have to focus on a lot of other things besides their trait uptime, the food uptime. So the next best food that you can take are truffle steaks. Since we're not taking side strikes anymore and we're taking flawless strikes, we need a little bit extra crit chance, and truffle steaks give that along with 100 power. That puts us in a pretty good situation, especially in regards to the fact that we have the extra crit chance or crit damage. Truffle steaks are a go-to food. If you have a ranger in your party who will be providing you spotter, then the optimal food becomes sweet and spicy butternut squash soup. That will allow you to have a very high crit chance, and this will maximize your DPS. So if there's no ranger in your group, you want to go with truffle steaks. If there is a ranger in your group, you want to go with sweet and spicy butternut squash soup. For low-level dungeons, it should be noted that lifesteal food is very powerful. Lifesteal food in lower-level dungeons can actually be a bigger DPS increase than most other foods, so I would be highly advising you to keep lifesteal foods around. Additionally, lifesteal foods are good when you're in random pugs and you can't count on your teammates to do what they're supposed to do, and you might take some hits. And lastly, in certain dungeons where you can't use the appropriate slaying potion, Scale Venom is always an option to help keep weakness and vuln up. So it's definitely a good option, especially in some low-level dungeons. You are power capped, and using sharpening stones will not actually increase your power because you're limited by the cap. So with that said, Scale Venom becomes a pretty useful little thing to have. So that is it for consumables. I will be moving on to DPS rotations. Alright guys, so DPS rotations. I have a video on my channel for Thief describing the basic but optimal DPS rotation, and I will show an updated example after this. Since we don't have Infusion of Shadow anymore, that particular rotation is no longer valid. So the standard rotation is Cloak and Dagger, followed by Backstab, a full auto chain, and then the first two attacks of the next chain, which are Double Strike and Wild Strike, followed by Cloak and Dagger and repeat. This will keep your initiative as full as possible and allow you to maximize your DPS from the lead strikes trait. Lastly, when to go into Heartseeker. It's important to note that the threshold for Heartseeker being better DPS than Cloak and Dagger rotation is 25% HP. In the past, many guides on the internet declared that one should start his Heartseeker rotation at 50%. However, those guides did not take into account that the PvE version of Cloak and Dagger has a higher coefficient than the PvP version, and the math worked out that the PvE version made you want to Cloak and Dagger backstab for much longer. They've normalized between the two, but still, the optimal place is 25%. So, you want to continue to Cloak and Dagger backstab until the boss reaches 25%. At that time, you'll want to activate your Assassin Signet and begin Heartseekering until the boss is dead. One note about that, though, is if the boss fight is going to be very short, such as like 10 seconds or less, you might want to begin Heartseekering at 50% directly after a backstab to get the revealed training buff, as Heartseeker in place of auto attacks of the dagger is a DPS increase. Lastly, important to know when to include stealing in your rotation. If your party needs the Vigor for survivability, or the days on demand from Sleight of Hand, you should steal when stealing is most advantageous for those things. If your only concern is DPS, you should steal prior to beginning your Heartseeker rotation, or in the case of a very long fight, steal on cooldown after your very first Cloak and Dagger. You'll Cloak and Dagger and backstab and then steal, and then continue to steal on cooldown. If it's a medium range fight, you want to save your steal for right when you're about to go into Heartseeker mode. So that's how stealing will work as part of a DPS rotation. And we'll wrap things up with slot skills next, and then I will close it out with an example of the DPS rotation in action. Alright, I want to briefly touch on our healing, utility, and elite skills. For healing, our default choice is Signet of Malice. In conjunction with a thief's naturally high rate of attack, it produces a very high amount of healing per second. Particularly, one exception to using Signet of Malice is particularly challenging boss fights where extra evasion is needed. In that case, you'll switch to Withdraw. However, for 99% of fights in the game, Signet of Malice is the way to go. For utilities, our base skills are always Signet of Agility and Assassin Signet. Agility's passive grants you an extra 180 precision. Assassin's passive gives you 180 power passively. These are a fantastic boost to our personal DPS. Assassin Signet, the active, will give you a 15% attack buff on your next 5 attacks, which is great for when you're going into Heartseeker mode. When Signet of Agility is activated, it gives everyone in your party full endurance back, which is fantastic in challenging content where people are running out of dodges. These skills will very rarely leave your bar. Though if you ever need any extra utility and must remove one of them, swap Assassin Signet before you remove Agility. The third slot on our bar is open and is reserved for whatever utility your party needs at the time. If your party needs extra long stealth, I advise you to bring Shadow Refuge. If you need a Defiant Strip or a pull, Scorpion Wire is your go-to there. If you need projectile defense or blinds, Smokescreen is great. And Blinding Powder for when you need just a very brief amount of stealth or an extra on-demand blast finisher. That is good. And in fact, in PvE, there's even times when you will use Needle Trap in effect to keep a boss immobilized. If you have absolutely no use for any of your utility skills and all you want is a straight DPS buff, I suggest Infiltrator Signet. The initiative gain from the passive of Infiltrator Signet is not fantastic, but it is better than nothing, and it will keep your lead strikes up a little bit higher and allow you to do just that bit of more damage. For our elites, all of them are rather attractive, and they all have their own niche. Thieves Guild is useful in order to call additional thieves in to support you. They have an on-demand CC, which is good for Defiant Stripping, and they provide quite a bit of DPS over their lifetime. Basilisk Venom exists purely for Defiant Stripping. That is the best use of it. If you know you're in a situation where you need to quickly strip Defiant off a boss to maybe back-to-back ice bows, my stock setup is Basilisk Venom and Scorpion Wire. This way you can go 3 quick rips of Defiant off, and with your steal you can take the 4th Defiant off, and so your party really only has to contribute 1 Defiant strip to get the boss ready to be CC'd again. So that is a pretty optimal way to go. And if you need additional projectile reflex, Dagger Storm is the way to go. Also, there are times when you do need stability. This is your best access, or probably your only access to stability as a thief. So I highly recommend using Dagger Storm solely for stability when needed. That is basically it for the utility skills of Thief. Some of them are extra niche, and you will know how to use them and when to use them as appropriate. One thing I want to briefly mention is Signet of Shadows as a passive 25% movement speed increase is really nice for going around open world when you're by yourself and you don't have really good access to swiftness. You'll probably want that, so always keep that one in mind. And that is it for slot skills. Now, coming up is going to be an example of our DPS rotation. Alright, so that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed my updated Thief build guide. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask again in the comments, and I will do my best to answer them. If you want to see this build in action, tune into my stream, twitch.tv, Nike_DnT. Wednesday through Sundays, I will stream. A couple nights a week, I dedicate to playing Thief, and you will see how this build functions in Dungeons and Fractals. So I will see you there. Thanks again for watching, guys. Have a great day.